Okay, welcome everyone. This is not my normal streaming hours. We are up early, at least for me. We are going to be going through and learning some Terraform with Dan from Build 5.9s, just kind of starting from the basics and building up. Dan, welcome. Thank you for coming on and joining. So
Yeah,
your screen is on and live, and I will let you introduce yourself.
yeah, great. Thanks, Kevin. So, Dan Patrick here. I'm pretty excited to be hanging out with you and learning some Terraform. So, I'm an Azure MVP, and I've been working with Azure since before it was a real product because I worked at Microsoft when it was being developed and that sort of thing. And um, my focus is kind of on infrastructure and networking and kind of Azure, you know, stuff, right? And I'm wanting to dive into doing more Terraform. I know ARM pretty well, right? And can be a little dangerous with that. And also love the Azure CLI. It's one of my favorite things in the world when it just comes to working with Azure. And Chris Peachman and I, write a blog called build59s.com, and we've been starting to do more Terraform because we're using it more and more on projects, right? So
Yeah.
we have something that we call Azure Kung Fu, which is like a bunch of things that we've put together about like CLI commands and VMs and things like that to help people get started. And we're starting on a Terraform Kung Fu project now, right? Where we're going to build stuff out. And so, I thought it would be pretty cool to stream that and kind of let people see what we're going to create. I know you know Terraform really well, right? Because we work together on some projects. Um, so I'm learning it while we're doing it, and that's kind of the goal, right? Learn it better. Um, and so we wrote a bunch of stories, as good DevOpsy kind of people would do, right?
That's the
um,
usual good idea.
yeah, so we wrote a bunch of stories and we built some sprints and that sort of thing in Azure DevOps, and we have an epic called TF Kung Fu, and we started with a bunch of IaaS stories, and basically these are just going to be the resource providers, right? And we're going to start with, just taking a look at some of the more simple things, and then maybe we'll get to some PaaS resources later. But we'll start with just kind of like resource groups, virtual networks, network security groups, NICs, public IPs, VMs, that sort of thing. Um, that's kind of in our first sprint, and we name these after bands. So I feel a little stupid with Terraform, so I picked up the band Slightly Stupid for the first the first sprint. And you and I, we kind of messed around the other day, and we went through and wrote the resource group examples.
Yep.
And these will eventually all be, in OSS up in GitHub. We haven't done any PRs yet for this stuff, but we kind of came up with this format of kind of 101, 201, 301 with tasks for each one of these stories, with the concept just being that there's a real simple way to do a provider, right, where we just hard code everything, the names of things and that sort of thing. And then the 201 would get a little bit more complex. Maybe we're using like locals and variables and things like that. And then 301 would be a shared module. So we would invoke a module to build that resource, right?
Yep.
And so the first part of this is really just looking at how do we, um, do a good job, write some clean code, hopefully with your guidance.
We'll see
um,
what I can do.
yeah, and make good decisions, right? And learn how to do that. And so as we're learning, also be able to stream. People can watch the stream, pick it up, and see what we were doing. Maybe watch our struggles as we go. Normally we just throw stuff out there, right, and
Yeah.
say, "Hey, here's a repo, download and use." Whereas here, you can kind of follow along and see what we do.
Yeah.
Because I know I certainly will struggle through this, especially when we get to the more complex things, right?
Yeah. Well, and it's anybody who's watched my stream, I'm sure, has watched me fall over and run into all kinds of fun problems at various times.
Exactly. So I've got obviously a private branch that this isn't public yet that we've worked on. This will end up as the Terraform Kung Fu under Build 5.9s. If you go to our blog or end up on our GitHub, An example of kind of where this will go is the AZ Kung Fu. So we have this repo where we wrote, various different things. This one's a VM. It's kind of a one-click ARM template that gives you a virtual machine that's running out in Azure with a bunch of apps and things like that installed. The cool thing about this is this gets you up and running. When you click on this, it'll pop you out into the Azure portal. You'll, put in a couple of items like what resource group you want it to be in, of course, your username and password, and then maybe what your source address is, so you can lock down the network security groups and no one can hack your VM. And you'll have in just a couple of seconds, you'll have a VM that's up and running that has all these tools on it, right? It's got the CLI. We set it up with Windows subsystem for Linux. It's got Terraform. It's got Kubernetes. Like kubectl. It's got all kinds of tools on it, right?
Oh yeah, nice.
Which is pretty cool. And then in the AZ Kung Fu, which is sort of like this terraform-kung-fu, we wrote a bunch of samples for the AZ CLI, right? So we follow kind of the same thing where we're just helping you to look at and have good examples. And there's some templates and samples in here. Like, for example, if you wanted to, stop a VM, we've got just a real quick, dirty sample written in Bash to stop a VM, right? Stop or deallocate. But maybe you want to stop all of the VMs. So here we have a command that will load a list of all the VMs, and then you can stop them all, right?
Yep.
So this is the idea of kind of the Kung Fu, right? Where we're showing, okay, well, AZ VM stop, that's a real simple command, but here's a pretty complex thing. Like, you could put this in a run book that would shut down everything in a dev resource group, or you could construct it how you wanted. So that's the idea of this Kung Fu stuff, and we want to do it with Terraform to help people get started. And like I said, I'm cheating along the way to I'm getting started. And it's not that I haven't done quite a bit of Terraform, because I have, but it's more about building something really cool, taking it to that next level, but at the same time, kind of taking people along with us. So that's what we're doing. If you're up for it.
I'm always up for coding. So
yeah, right. Yeah.
cool.
So you want to first look maybe what we did yesterday? That'll maybe.
Yeah,
Right?
let's circle back and see where we ended up on the resource group stuff from yesterday. So we marked all of our stuff as closed. I assume that means we got it all in and submitted, because I think I signed off right before we ran it, and I think I said have fun.
Yeah, I said that the tasks were on the board. I think I moved into resolve because I haven't PR'd them yet. So they're closed in the sense of we did them, but they're only resolved because we won't move the story to close till we actually do a PR. At least that was kind of what I was thinking. Okay. Whatever.
Hey, as far as I'm concerned, you are Scrum Master and Product Owner, so
yeah, okay.
Sounds great to me.
Exactly. And of course, when we do the PR, Chris Peachman, who's my pal with Bill 5.9s, he has to review it for me. So right. It'll be a full PR, right? That's the way we work. Even when we're doing stuff together, we like to follow that method because
Well, yeah, you want that extra set of eyes and validation that you haven't gone off the deep end.
For sure. Yeah, the first thing he said yesterday when I showed him what we did is he said, "There's a 202. Why is there a 202?" Because he said we're going to do 101, 201, 301. And I was like, well, for resource groups, we wanted to show one intermediate step. And he was like, okay. So
it's like, how did you complicate one of the easiest Azure resources?
Exactly. He's like, we made it so simple and you made it complicated. I said, well, it's complicated, So in this sprint, we said RGs, VNets, NSG, NIC, PIP for public IP to VMs. The idea was we would get from a resource group all the way down to a VM in this sprint, which is kind of cool. And they sort of go in this order, I guess, don't you think?
Yeah, right? At least in the dependency tree, sort of what you have to stand up to get all the way to a VM.
Yeah, so obviously we have to have a resource group. The VNet has to be there in order to, lay a VM down. An NSG then would probably be next if we wanted to, have that for the subnets, network security groups to filter traffic. And then of course we need a NIC. Actually, we need a PIP before we need a NIC. That's out of order. We need a public IP that's there. So then when we build the NIC, when we associate it, it'll be there.
Yep.
And then all of that stuff has to be around in order to create the VM. Now we know Terraform will build that graph out and it'll do it in the right order for us, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the way we're doing this, we want to write that code in order so we can sort of build it all together.
Yeah, let people have a small sample of individual pieces so they can see the whole thing get built up rather than just getting the whole cake at the end.
Yeah, exactly. You know, what's funny is that on this VM one, I think I'm going to add a quick task. I think I'm going to add a task that says build a quick start, right?
Yeah.
Because when we're doing these, we're going to have that tree of kind of like we have here, in the source. If you can see this here, we've got a template called RG with the different folders for 101, 201, and so today, well, I guess we'll pick up VNet, so we'll add a folder for VNet, right?
Yep.
But I think we will want a quick start, which is going to be like these quick starts in the repo will be, one file basically, just like a main TF that you can just run, and you can see how all this stuff that we construct can be pulled together to roll out a VM, right?
Yep.
So
if we
yes,
wanted to go really crazy, we could even take that custom deployment that you have and roll a VM with that.
yeah, no, for sure. I mean, maybe what we'll do is, that AZ Kung Fu VM. That would be cool, right? We could roll it all together and create that AZ Kung Fu. So that's a good idea. So maybe we'll.
Side note: if you want to, you can either move or close that little Skype window up in the corner.
Oh yeah, sorry. That's a good call.
It's fine. It'll actually come back on its own. Skype likes to do that.
Really?
Yeah.
I haven't used Skype in so long, so that's kind of cool. It still has the same tone when you call. It feels like 1999. Like, doo.
People got used to it. You can't change perfection.
Exactly, right? Okay, cool. Well, I say we do VNets. What do you think?
Let's do it.
All right. So VNets. Okay, so we're going to write a 101, a 201, and a 301. But yeah, let's review that resource group code.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
So what all did we do after?
Let me close all these files so we're not confused about what the heck is open. Go away. Go away. Go away. Go away. Okay. So, is that too small? Should I make my font bigger?
If you want to go a little bigger, that'd be good.
Nah. There is, let's see. I'm using Rider, which is kind of cool.
I will say something I didn't think about yesterday when you commented on it was because I know I've seen people use JetBrains' Go tool for this. I didn't know Rider had support for this. I mean, it kind of makes sense. All the JetBrains tools kind of all flow together, and kind of there's overlaps between a bunch of them, but I never realized Rider would do Terraform too. Was there an add-on or something you had to put in for it, or did it just work out?
Yeah. So there is an add-on. I'm kind of newer to using Rider, to be honest with you.
That's fine.
I haven't. Someone client was using it one day, and I saw some great support for it. And I was like, "Wow, this is really cool." But there is an add-on. They call it a plugin. Yeah, they call it a plugin in JetBrains.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, this
Visual Studio Brain.
Yes, this is that, and it's fantastic. The support is really nice. And then I also use there's a you see this highlighting where you can see where things are checked in. You see that?
Oh yeah,
So
yeah.
there's like a Git toolkit or something like that that works nicely. And then there's really great support like for you can see like our graph, like our Git graph and stuff. There's really great support for Git in the tool. You can see exactly what's going on in your graph. Of course, this one's pretty straight for us right now, but
we keep things simple.
Yeah, I mean it's pretty simple when there's just one or two of us working on it. But that's very nice. It does auto fetching and things like that. Like it'll go out and check and say, hey, like I've got an update or something. Somebody else, does a PR and merges something, and you can fast forward branch and all that kind of stuff. So it's really nice. But yeah, the provider is fantastic, which you'll see as we're doing this. So
Cool.
All right, cool. So we've got here in our 101 resource group, we basically just wrote this as one file, right? So this is
Yep.
just a main PDF. Um, I added here the subscription and tenant. These are optional,
Yep.
right? You deploy with Terraform, you're doing typically using the Azure CLI, right, um, to log in effectively, right? That's when we're just running it like this, just from our local machine.
Yep.
And so you have to have your context set correctly. If you have a lot of subscriptions,
Yeah. Liaise the account set subscription for making
exactly.
sure you're deploying to the right one. Otherwise, you log in, and next thing you know,
Yeah.
oopsie.
Yeah. And in this case, obviously, I just have one, so it's pretty easy. But like some of my other accounts, I have 30, 40 subscriptions with 20 directories, right? Because we work with so many clients. So that's clearly an issue. I don't want to be messing around rolling out terraform-kung-fu to one of my customers subscriptions. So yeah, so I actually, when I'm doing things on my own, I will hard code this here. So I'm telling the provider, like, use that subscription, right?
Yeah.
But obviously for this public repo, that's kind of silly. I wouldn't do that. So I just left those there for people. So here we're just saying, you've got the resource provider. We're saying, we're using 2.0, and, anything that's after that's basically the latest, right? I think that's how it works. It'll pick up the latest. This little tilde command there
Yep.
is going to do
Grab
that.
the latest 2.0 provider or
Yep.
2x version, which I want to say yesterday when we looked, there was like 2.29. I think it dropped like a week ago.
Yep.
Terraform providers rev at a very, very fast cadence.
Yeah. Well, the good community support, right? I mean,
Oh,
and
yeah.
and frankly, that's one of the good things. I mean, one of the things that we kind of complain about with doing something like Terraform instead of using ARM is because Microsoft comes out with something new. There's a new preview every minute, and you have customers like, oh, I want to try the new Azure Synapse, blah blah blah, whatever it is, and then there's no support for it in the provider. So thank goodness that there's a good community, right, that goes and gets after that stuff pretty quick.
Oh, yeah.
Um, so here we just you have to have this features block too, by the way. That's a new thing.
Yep.
There's nothing in it, but you have to have it. And then here we've got just a resource, right? So we're just declaring a resource. We're using the provider for resource group. So Azure RM underscore resource underscore group. And then that next thing is a name that we give it, right? So that's the Terraform name that we assign. So I said B59s because this is all build 5.9. So that's kind of what we call B59s is what we call it.
Mm-hmm.
RG. And then we hard coded a location and a name, right? And those were provided by the provider, just like you would think. Like I could just start type resource, hit tab, choose resource group, and then I could say stream underscore RG, and then put in that name, right? So
Gotcha.
that's the tool, and you're used to this sort of thing with IntelliSense for any of these kind of IDEs.
Yep.
But anyway, so obviously we don't need that. So this was just a really basic thing. And then obviously to run this, we need to do a Terraform init. We need to be in the right directory though, right? Because we have a lot of different directories with Terraform files. So like this is RG101, right? So we would do a Terraform. I usually like to do a format on the files, right? That Terraform
Just to
FMT.
make sure. Yeah.
That's something you've been harping on me about to make sure it's purdy, right? And
Yeah.
it'll line it up for you. It's kind of cool actually. Like if you like here, like let's mess this up on purpose for a second, right? I don't know if I have to save the file or not in order to do that. I don't think you do, but we can actually see it move. It should go.
Put focus back to the window.
There it
There
goes.
we
Oh,
go.
thank you. Yeah, you're right. The focus wasn't on the window. Yeah, so like it moves it for you, which is pretty cool. So it'll line it all up, all in a nice canonical sort of view, right?
Yep.
So um, we could do I guess a validate if we wanted to, right?
Yep. Which at least gives you confidence that you haven't, like your variable references and whatnot, all line up.
Yeah.
You haven't typoed something.
Uh, what did I do wrong here? Oh, it's over firing on.
Uh,
That was weird. Didn't want to do an init.
da, da, da.
Yeah.
Executable Validating HashiCorp. Wait, what? Start with Terraform provider, because Terraform init just goes and looks up all the providers you're using and downloads them into your .terraform directory.
Yeah, that was weird. Yeah, it doesn't want to.
Could not load plugin. It's failing to load your Azure RM provider.
That's weird.
In the event of this, yeah, whack that.
Kill the directory.
Kill the directory.
Yeah.
Then rerun the init.
That was weird.
Yeah.
Did not expect to see that.
We didn't. Did we update your Terraform halfway through the other day?
I don't know.
I can't remember. I know I updated mine because I was telling you commands and then realized I didn't have 13 installed.
Yeah.
Yeah. There we go.
Yeah. So I don't know what happened, but truth be told, we were doing a lot of, we're doing something that's kind of unusual, right? Like in every one of these folders, we're running Terraform init, we're downloading the provider. So who knows what's happening.
Well, and we mucked with a bunch of stuff when we did our git ignore too. So there's a reasonable chance we may have deleted something.
That's true.
Oopsie.
Yeah. That's very possible. So I'm going to get into this subscription that I'm using here. This is my test subscription I use. And what did we say? We said B59s, right? That was the resource group that we declared on this guy?
I think so. B59's East RG.
B59's East RG.
And it may have, looking at what was out there, we may have had some of the stuff from the either 202 or 301 group deployed.
Yeah, let's go ahead and whack these.
Careful whacking in the portal, though. Remember, because those may be in state.
See?
So, so remember, Terraform doesn't look at the infrastructure to know what's there. Terraform looks at its state file when it's determining what goes out there. So that is something I was going to bring up too, is in these examples, we've just done local state, like internal to the directory. We haven't done like shared state for if you were working on a team bigger than, say, one, or if you wanted your state file like backed up in the cloud somewhere. And I don't know if that necessarily makes sense in the templates. Yeah, we must have botched something when we did our git ignore.
We did. We did something because because
we were undoing and resetting stuff, and we must have deleted things that we weren't supposed to.
Really?
Yeah, because at some point I think we probably want to get. I don't know. It doesn't really make sense as a template as much, but maybe a quick start of doing remote state, because that way you don't have to have it local to the folder.
Yep.
Because that's at least reflective of what you should be doing in like any sort of enterprisey grade thing. Or
for sure, using that back end, right? Like that's definitely important. Yeah. See, it just wants to add because I whacked the state when I killed that file, folder.
So, so now that you've whacked the state file, go ahead and kill it in Portal.
I'll just kill it in the Portal now. But this is kind of an important lesson in a way, right? Like, Skype just wants to put that window up there.
Yeah, like I said, it'll come back.
Yeah.
It wants to remind you that I'm still here talking, and you should not forget about me.
Well, I guess that's fair. You're like, oh, Kevin's a jerk. He doesn't know anything about Terraform, right?
So it's like, this guy keeps talking, therefore the window needs to be on top.
Yeah, that's sort of like the modern version of thinking you hung up on somebody's voicemail, but you didn't, and you're like, oh, that person's a jerk. Or like you butt dial them, and it's like they don't pick up and leaving this long diatribe about how you don't like them.
So basically what you're saying is exact same problem. We've just advanced to forward a few decades.
Exactly. So this will take a second to delete resource groups. I don't know why they take a long time, but they do. So anyway, if we go back to here, let's go back to our 101 directory, because that's what we were mucking with, right?
Yep.
And remember, I got to go back to my folder because, we're running Terraform in each one of these individual folders, right? Because they're effectively a project almost, like that one individual folder.
Yep.
Right? Like from a Terraform perspective.
It's very directory based. Which is great. Like anybody who's used to managing code in a directory based project structure, I mean, that's effectively all it is there's not really a project file. It's just I've got a folder of stuff.
Well, and let's talk about that for a minute. So I've got a folder of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't matter where it is, right?
Yep.
That main folder here, when I'm running the Terraform executable, right? When I did a plan, which is the first typical thing we do to see what Terraform thinks it's going to do,
Yep.
right? And obviously here we've gotten what we call a plan where it says, hey, here's a plan. It's going to do the following things. It's going to create a resource group. Now, the one interesting thing first is the comment where it says pound Azure RM resource group dot B59s underscore RG. That second part, that part behind the dot, matches up, if you remember, to the name that we gave it over here, right?
Yep.
Right. So that's cool. And then the other thing that's interesting about this is it says what its name would be, right? So you see there that was hard coded, obviously. The location, we had that hard coded. But then talk to us about this known after apply with the ID. What's going on there?
So a resource group, like most of Azure resources, have IDs associated with them. They're the long, fully qualified name. So it'll start with like /subscription /subscription ID /type name resource group /resource group ID all the way down. And so in this case, what it's saying is after the Terraform resource group has been created, there will be an ID attribute set on it that will be known after it's been created. So it doesn't know it yet because it's not there. Some things, just if you know Azure well enough, you can probably divine what it's going to be. But a lot of times you may end up wanting to take that ID and feed it into something else later on. Right. So you might want to tell something else, hey, by the way, here's the resource group I'd like you to deploy into. Here's the ID of that resource group. Go there.
Yeah.
So,
and that's really important too, because that name, that kind of fully, you could almost think of it as a fully qualified Terraform name where it's got the provider and then dot whatever it is, right? That's important later because that's how it's referenced in the state file, right?
yes.
Like the Terraform state file. And so some of the more advanced things in here can get interesting. With that name, you can take actions that like don't destroy everything you built, right? Like say you had a virtual machine and it's got a name like that. It says Azure RM virtual machine, whatever the thing is called. If you wanted to like just destroy that one VM, you could target that thing, right, with that name. And it's not the ID. That ID that we were talking about is the Azure ID, right? And we can actually see that, like if we do an apply here with that plan, it's going to create that resource group. After it's created, we will be able to see that ID in the portal, right?
Yep.
So I'm going to go ahead and say yes, we want to build this, and that's important from an Azure perspective. But in the case of a special thing like a resource group where all other things are contained, what's interesting about that ID is later when we get into more complex things, you can see how we need that ID to be referenced when we build something else, right? Like when we go and write this VNet code we're going to do in a minute, we have to tell the VNet like which resource group it has to be in, right? So in our code, we have to find a way to map what gets created to then be used over there. So it looks like this
and
is
you can see that ID at the end too, on the end of your Terraform apply, because it actually tells you.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, awesome.
Yeah, /subscription and then big long GUID.
Yep.
And then resource group / there.
So. Yep. And when we have a resource that's other than a resource group, what will happen is it will have, like if we build something in this resource group, that string will get longer, right? Because it'll have subscription, it'll have resource group, and then it'll have the the ID or the name of whatever it is we built, right? So over here, we see now that we're building this B59's ECS2, right? So it's back. If I go to its properties, then we can see that that's the same thing, right? So we can see that subscription ID, we can see where it is, all that sort of stuff. Yay, everybody on the internet can see my subscription ID. That's okay. There's nothing in here. That's cool. All right. Okay, cool. So I guess really fast, next, I guess, then would be the more complex version of that.
Yeah,
And
because
there's
I
more.
don't know if we could have made it simpler.
Yeah, right. But there's more files now. So wow. So we went from one file to one, two, three, four, five.
Well, you're skipping over 201.
Oh, sorry. Yes, thank you. Excuse me. We went.
But
We
there,
still have
but you're right. Yes, there's still a lot of files.
still a lot of files. So the first thing is here is we have something in main called locals. So what the heck is a local?
So yeah, on this one we started breaking it apart because just hard coding everything in one place is a bad idea, obviously. So we went through, and inside of main TF, Terraform allows you to declare variables that are, in this case, local to this directory. So when you see locals, those are all the variables that are available, just essentially for you to declare and use throughout all of these Terraform files. Now in this case, I think the RG name we're only using in one place.
Yeah.
But in general, as soon as you start hard coding something multiple times, stop, back up, create yourself a local variable, and you can declare this locals block multiple times. It's not
Yeah.
by convention. We put it inside of main TF so that if I go, hey, where the heck is this variable declared? We know where to look, right?
Yeah.
So some of the conventions that a lot of times I'll use in here are based on people using straight text editors and not necessarily having great
Yeah.
IDE experiences, because
Hmm.
the go to definitions kind of eliminates the hey, where is this located problem.
Yeah. Hmm.
But that's the only reason that we put it inside of the main TF, is just so that we can have a variable and relatively quickly know exactly where it's located.
So let me say what I think I heard back to you. Okay.
Yep.
So what one of the things you said was is that this, even though we have, you can see there's even a file called vars over there. There's variables, right? This is effectively also a variable, meaning I can address this thing called, its actual name would be locals.rg underscore name,
Yep.
right? And this happens, obviously, it's a string, obviously, right? That's what we see here. So anything inside those two quotes would be injected to wherever I reference that name,
Yep.
right? Now, it's available to all the files in this folder.
Correct.
So
So you can
providers, RG, vars, any file that's here or any file I added. So if I like added a folder underneath 201, would it be there?
it would not.
It
So
would
pretty
not.
much all of the scoping inside of Terraform is directory based.
So like if I did like, we just call this foo, right? And I created a new full file here
Yep.
called, dan.tf.
Yeah. If you tried to do like a new, resource group or similar, right?
It wants me to create, right? Okay, well, let's do that. So if I did resource group, call this foo,
Yep.
and I wanted to use local dot. There's nothing there,
Yeah.
right?
It's
See,
not going to show up because everything around here is very much tied to a directory base. That is the way Terraform likes to effectively do their scoping and grouping, is with folders. So you get
yeah.
to define whatever scoping you want as long as it's within the folder.
So let's move Dan up a level,
Yep.
right? So if I move Dan up a level, and we come back here, right, and we try to address this now,
Yeah.
there it is,
What we
right?
found.
So that's an important thing to learn about locals, right?
Yep.
Because it can be incredibly frustrating. We're like, well, it's like in the same folder. No, it's not actually in the same folder, right?
Yeah.
Because
Well,
I
not
don't know about
subdirectories
you.
at least.
Exactly. Subdirectory maybe is a better word, right? Like, I always would think to myself, well, if something's below it, right? Like, because you think about like rights or something, like I have rights on a folder or on a directory, I should have rights below that, like it's quote unquote inherited or something. But locals are not inherited, they are in the folder where you are. So that's important when you get a more complex type of.
Yeah, and it actually extends beyond just the locals too. Like even because you can reference like the resource group and reuse it in different places as well. But everything in Terraform is effectively scoped to just the folder that it's in.
The
Now
folder that's in.
yeah. So if something wanted to say reference that resource group, say I'm going to hypothetically build a VNet and I want to reference the resource group to put the VNet inside of that, right?
Yeah.
If the resource group is declared in a different folder than what you are in, you don't
Yep.
have direct access to that. You have to effectively pass it around, because you'd brought up the vars TF down there below too, and
Yeah, let's take a look at that.
that's the other key one to note that kind of goes hand in hand after the local is the variable. So whereas
Mhm.
locals are local to your individual directory, a variable is something that can be passed in from outside.
Mhm.
And in that last 301 example, we look at modules, which is effectively the way of saying I want to reference another folder.
Yeah.
I want to bring it in. And the moment you reference another folder, now we've got this modular structure that we can use. And the variables, or in our case, we put them in a vars TF, again, just for convention, as a way of saying, hey, when I want to see my incoming stuff, here's where I
Mhm.
look. Because all of this stuff could be, just blindly concatenated into one big Terraform file. That's a thing you could do.
Sure.
It's not a great scalable thing, but it's a thing you could do.
Sure.
So in this case, we now have a variable location that we can pass in from the outside. And because we've specified a default value for it, it's optional. So if somebody wanted to reference this folder from outside and use it for something, they could give us a location or not. It's up to them.
Got it.
If they don't, we'll just use ECUS2 and away we go.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting too is with these, if you look at the samples and kind of just, scour the internet saying, Terraform space Azure go, or Terraform whatever.
Yeah.
Of course, I mean, everybody has an opinion. There's a million Git repos with this kind of stuff in it. But one of the things that is kind of the great thing about Terraform, but also can be a little maddening when you're first trying to learn it, especially for a person like me that's more infrastructure, that's trying to become more DevOps, is like I need some sort of framework to like hang my head around, right? Um, and like even these names like main, output, RG, vars, like main looks to me like, oh wow, I'm writing C from back in the day, right? Like that must have been where that came from, maybe, or something, right? But it doesn't have to be that, right? Like it doesn't have to be that. Like
Yeah.
we were saying here, like we put our locals in main,
Mm-hmm.
but I mean we could just as easily create a file called locals, right?
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
you wanted
Again,
to.
this is all just a lot of the Terraform structure that we've done in here is all just convention based.
Yeah.
And if somebody would like to document a different convention, you're welcome to do so.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's so anyway. So in main, and by the way, you will see a lot. And one of the things that's missing from the main here, as opposed to the main up here, was the provider block was in the main because we only had one file before. We had to declare the provider, right?
Yeah, and
Um,
in our case, we've got a very simple setup where we're only using the Azure RM provider. But Terraform's not limited to just Azure. Um,
oh yeah,
there,
absolutely.
there's a large number of providers. So pretty much any major cloud thing that you can name, there's a provider for. There's a
Hmm.
bunch of providers for things like interacting with local files. There's
Yeah.
a random provider if you just want to randomly generate pet names, for example, because
Yep. Mhm.
that's a thing.
Or maybe like randomly create just a couple of digits to put on the name end of a resource or something you want to create, right? Like a storage account, for example, has to have a unique name that's globally unique for all customers of all of Azure, right?
Yep.
So we could put Kevin and Dan stream 02345, right? Like we can use that random generator to do something like that. So
Right.
and
You may
also
have
other things
exceeded the
like
max length
AW.
there, but that's fine.
Well, you know what I mean, right? Anyway, so here we have a providers TF
Yep.
where we've declared the provider we're going to use, and as you said, like we could put in another provider, right? Like there's a bunch of them here, and like I don't know, let's find like Chef or something, right? Like we could use other providers that we could put here. So this is kind of a good idea to get in the habit of using this provider because it's just cleaner if you need to bring another thing in, like VMware. There's a million of them. I think there's like 200 plus providers now. So
Yeah, and it's worth noting too. So sometimes it's not always directly apparent, but there's a subtle thing that happens if you look at your RGTF. The
mhm.
first part of your quote unquote type name is actually the name of your provider. So if you look at that, that's where that Azure RM underscore comes from, right?
Yep.
Is it's indicating, hey, this is the provider that I'm using. And so there's a bunch of stuff because occasionally you want actually maybe even multiple Azure RM providers, like you're going to two different subscriptions and deploying stuff across multiple thingies, right? There's some advanced cases we can probably dive into at some point where you might need multiple providers.
Well, that comes back to this, right?
Right.
So
Because this
if you
is,
had like a dev and a test and a stage and a prod or something, right?
yeah,
You know?
depending on how you want to structure your Terraform and do it. I
Hmm.
was thinking, like, especially if we were talking about VNets, if you're doing like peerings across VNets that maybe
Mm,
span subscriptions, right?
yeah,
That's a great case where you want your Terraform to manage those VNets in both subscriptions. But if you have a single provider, it's going to be pointed at an individual subscription. And so being able to
yeah,
declare multiple providers then and then specifying, hey, which of those providers? Because by default, if you don't do anything and you only have one, which is by far the common case,
yeah,
it's just going to use that one. But
yeah.
you can have multiple. Um,
Got it.
Alias is the magical keyword if anybody pulls the docs.
There you go. Okay, so let's look at, so that was main. We had a local. We've
Yep.
got a provider where we talked about that.
Mm-hmm.
And then we've got our G, which, again, looks a lot like our simple one, but we're doing something very different now, right?
Yeah.
No more of the hard coding, aside from the name of the resource, which we have to declare here, right?
Yep.
So we've still got B59s underscore RG. That same Terraform name is going to be used here, but now we've got location and we've got name, but no longer do we have strings here. As a matter of fact, there's no string at all. So even though a string is required for this, tell us what we're doing here. So we've got location and name. So I see var.location and I see local.rg underscore name.
Yeah, so in this case, we've pulled out our hard-coded values and said, okay, now we actually want to move these out and start using variables because we're sort of foreshadowing what's to come in future folders there. So the
Yep.
location is var.location. So we talked about the vars TF and the main TF with the different variables. And it's important to note what type of variable we're looking at, whether it's a local variable or whether it's and maybe I shouldn't say the word local variable, whether it's a local or a variable, because variable you reference with var dot and locals you reference with local dot, just so that Terraform can differentiate where that value is coming in from. So in this
You're,
case, var.location says grab the location that was passed in, or in a lot of our cases, just the straight default value. So East US.
yep. Well, I was messing with you there because it said local variable in that file. I think you were reading. It was supposed to say update the variable to configure. It said local and space variable, right?
Yeah, that we're gonna call that a copy and paste error.
Yeah,
It
definitely.
makes us
Well,
sound better.
yeah, we haven't PR'd this stuff yet, right? So that's just the MIT license and stuff up there. So yeah, so we've declared a variable, and here there's a lot of different types of variables. In this case, obviously, we need a string because we're just saying East US 2. That value, that default value there, is what's going to be injected in. Obviously, we're looking for the location, and so when we are calling that in the RGTF is what we've called it,
Mm-hmm.
where we moved the creation of the resource out of the main TF and called out its own file, right? Um, and so we have the var.location, which is a variable, and the name is a local. Now, why? I mean, we could use a local for the location too, but why? Like, this is a real common thing. And for me, even still, I would say being somewhat novice with Terraform, where it's like, when do I use a local and when do I use a variable? Do you
Yeah.
have any guidance for that?
So in general, I'd say you pick the one that's the smallest scope for what you need. So the smallest scope is just hard code the value, but like I said earlier, if you use it more than once, that's probably a bad place to put it.
Yeah.
The locals would be the next step up for anything that you only need to share or provide within this folder. So
Mm,
if it's just some value that you're going to be using within this folder, declare it as a local. If it's
okay.
the moment you need effectively some level of control from outside, hey, I want to toggle that I can say turn this thing on, turn this thing off, or hey, I want to be able to reuse this same folder of Terraform code, but I want to change my location, right?
Yep.
Like maybe I don't always want to go into East US 2, but calling the resource group build 59s or B59s, yeah, I always
Mm.
want that. Um, that's the point where you switch it into a variable. Is you need some control or some switch from the outside to be able to, toggle it.
Well, and this is one important thing, right? So a local you cannot pass from the command line when you run it, correct?
Correct.
A
And yeah,
variable you can,
exactly.
right? And that's a big difference between the two. That's been, I mean, I liked your guidance there, but for me, one of the guidances was if I want to be able to run Terraform plan space and then inject a variable,
Hmm.
right? Like from the command line, that seems a little bit silly, but from a pipeline, right? Like a CI/CD pipeline, that's not silly at all. That's where we would do it, right?
Right.
So there's got to be one in here somewhere, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
so what
there
you're
it is.
looking for is the vars down there at the bottom. So
Yeah,
that's how you would set an individual variable, or because sometimes your variable list can start to get large, you can just feed
mhm,
it a variable file.
yeah,
Um, and the file has the same sort of structures there too. It also calls out there in the documentation that if you pick a magical name of what you're going to call it, those things will automatically get picked up for you. So if you want to have a file filled with a bunch of default variables that for whatever reason maybe you didn't want under source control because it has secret stuff in it or whatever, right? You can
yeah.
have something like that you don't have to repeatedly type the same thing on the command line every single time. So that can
Yeah,
be
that's
rather helpful
nice
too.
too. That's nice too, right? Because once again, going back to, and maybe we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, but with pipelines, we could like call a variable that is secured. Like with Azure DevOps, you could
Right.
do that, right? So we could create a secured, like a password, let's say for a VM or a SQL server or something. And from that command line, we can say, dollar SQL pass or something. And what will get injected there at the runtime of the pipeline will be the secret value that's stored like in Azure DevOps,
Hmm.
but we can't even see it. So like with a variable, a secret is what I think they call it, right? In Azure DevOps, if
Yep.
you put a secret in, you literally can't get it out. You can use it by calling the variable, but you can't get it out of Azure DevOps. You can't say like show me the
Right.
password. You can't
Yeah.
ever do that. Even if you have rights, it won't let you do it. So this is very cool. So the idea that we obviously that variable can be used because it's very powerful just in our code where we can reference it, but we can also override it. And I think the important thing to note here too is if we look at that var again, so yeah, there's a value there, but that's the default value, right,
Yep.
Kevin? It's not like I can override that
Yeah, you could set
with
a
something
location.
else.
Yeah, you could do, dash var location gets, West US, right? And all of a
Exactly.
sudden your 201 module goes, or 201 folder goes from pushing out to East US to West.
Got it. So if I change this to test for a minute and we go to, let's say 201, if I know how to use the directory. I don't think I did a terraform init here. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
doing a
not
init.
not since we whacked it. And the nice part,
Not
if you try to run an apply or a plan before the init, it'll whack you upside the head and say, "I don't know what you're talking about. Try again."
exactly. So if we do a terraform plan
Hmm.
and we run this, well, we're talking a lot about this. Maybe we're going too long talking about this, but I think it's kind of useful. I don't know.
Hey, whatever it
Maybe it's
takes.
useful.
Yeah,
Maybe
whatever it
it's
takes
useful
to
for
cement the
me.
concepts.
Well, I think it's good stuff because I mean we had some existing code, but it's kind of good to talk about. So here we see, obviously we've got a different name. I just wanted to do that so we don't have to go delete that other one.
Yep.
And we've got, basically the same sorts of things because it's the same type of code. And it says East US2, the location,
Yep.
right? So I could do an apply and run that now. So let's try to inject a different
Yeah.
um, variable there. So do I need to do I need to do another plan though, right? Because I want to inject the variable. Because if I did an apply right now, do I have to plan it or can I apply it? I don't know.
Well, yeah, so that's worth noting. So Terraform plan is going to show you what would happen if it were applied right now, right? So
Yeah.
it's looking at the current state file and it's looking at what your script says and saying, okay, what are the deltas? In this case, create a new resource group. So you can effectively use a plan similar to like what you would do with like a PowerShell what if,
Yeah.
to say, hey, what would happen if I were to run this? Terraform apply says, okay, we're done thinking about what would happen. Let's actually go and do it. Yeah, I believe you're gonna need to do the single ticks around that.
Gotta do the ticks, right?
Yeah, and it comes down to how the terminals group arguments that gets passed through.
Yeah.
So
I love how this terminal gives you a little light up there. Like it's like, hey, this is wrong, you know.
yeah, I can tell you already how the grouping goes. So yeah, if you run
So,
this plan, it should show you the different. It should rerun a new, effectively, what if, what's going to happen. Compare
yeah,
your state file, which is empty right now, right? Because we haven't done anything with this directory yet. And
exactly.
then your script, which says create a resource group. But in this case, we're going to change the value for the location variable and say, okay, now it's going to be Central US.
Okay. So let's try that.
And then,
We'll see
assuming
what
we've done all of our stuff correctly, our plan hopefully changes. If it doesn't, we have a bug.
happens. Right. And what's interesting is we I had to pass this name, right? So I had to say this variable equals the new value,
Yep.
right? So that's what we're
And
doing there.
the other
Let's see what.
interesting thing you can do too.
Hey,
So there it changed. So
cool.
the other thing that's worth noting is Terraform will actually pause and prompt you if you don't have that default value there and you don't pass something on the command line. So if you want to be very explicit about this, like I need that, like there is no reasonable default for this thing. I need to know, and I need you to tell me. So if you
Yep.
just comment that out or whack it for a moment,
Yep.
um, if you just run a Terraform plan again
Yep.
without specifying the var, it's going to
Yep.
stop and say, hold up, you need to tell me something about location,
Yeah.
right? So say, because it now knows this is a var that needs to be passed in. I haven't been given anything. I didn't see any of those magical file names.
Yep.
There was nothing on the command line. Please give me
So
one.
let's try a different one. So East US this time, right? So another interesting thing here also would be, because this is obviously going to work and come up and say East US, which you did, right?
Yep.
Another interesting thing would be to let's just do a plan. Um, and here we're just going to say, oh no, I took the default away. Okay, we'll do East US. So let's say I put in, I left it without a default, let's say, because that's the way it is right now. And I really want East US too, but I forget the two when I hit East US, right?
Yep.
And then I'm, drinking coffee or watching your stream or I'm doing something and I don't pay attention even to the plan, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I say, okay, it says one, sweet. I'm thinking in my mind East US 2, but it actually says East US. So I say, okay, this is awesome. Let's go ahead and do an apply. So obviously this is going to put that over in, well, I have to
Yeah,
type it
because
again.
apply is now the actual do it. It'll
Let,
still show a plan, right, and ask for confirmation before it does it.
so let's say I do it again, right? And I type East US. Now what's interesting is it happened. Obviously, it's a computer. It did what we told it to do. We're the idiot. It's not, right? It's saying yes, I want to apply. So I've now like 3 times in a row I boogered up what I wanted to do, which was actually be East US 2. So this is going to create it, right? I get
Yep.
the output as you see. I go over to the Azure portal, go to resource groups, and I see here, where is it called? It's not showing up yet. Come on. There it is. There's tests, and I go, oh no, I did East US by accident, right? And so I go back to the code and I say, okay, well, I want to run another plan because obviously that's wrong. This time I'm going to say East US 2,
Mm-hmm.
right? And what's going to happen here now? Because it's the same exact thing, but I'm changing something that's very
Yeah,
important.
yeah, you're changing some value about it, and this is actually one of the best things or most awesome things about Terraform is it's intelligent about handling deltas. So
Yep.
because it's tracking a state file of what it's deployed out already, it knows that what it last deployed was a resource group in East US, and so that little tilde on
Mm-hmm.
location says, hey, by the way, I know that that the change here is from East US to East US 2. And it even knows that that's going to cause the ID to change as well. And so it says, okay, the big scary force replacement at the end is key to note. You want to
Yep.
keep track of that because that means in order to make this change, I have to delete what's out there and recreate it with the new value. And
Yep.
sometimes that's okay, right? Resource groups, you may want to consider what's in it before you just whack it and recreate it.
Yeah.
because that's potentially bad. Um, but this ability to be able to effectively look at deltas and determine whether I need to recreate or whether it's an in-place edit that I can do
Yeah.
um, is insanely powerful. Um, versus trying to do this sort of scripting level stuff with either PowerShell or the CLI.
Yep.
Having it intelligently know when to do that, and that's really the Azure RM provider driving that, of
Yeah.
knowing here's the rules of what needs to be updated and what can't be.
Yeah, the other nice thing is sometimes you get into this weird things where deletes take a while too, and I've found that the Terraform provider is pretty good about keeping context and not failing, right? Like I've
Yeah.
seen scripts and things that from time to time they'll fail, whereas this is good. And by the way, isn't this contextual editor, this terminal here with the red, awesome? Like I love that. With projects Kevin and I work on it, sometimes you look at these giant plans and logs, and it's just a straight ASCII log, and you're like, I really wish it would say where something's going to destroy.
Yeah, or you look at it inside of, say, the virtualized terminal out in DevOps.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
so it is worth noting. So that's the VT100 control codes that give you that inside of the
Yep.
terminal, and most
Yep.
new terminals in Windows support it. Even CMD got updated to have effectively the same core as the PowerShell terminal in Windows
Great.
10 V several ones back.
Yeah.
Um, and so
Pretty awesome.
yeah, a lot of times if you don't have a terminal that's VT100 enabled, which was clearly the best technology of the 70s,
Yep.
you end up with those funky character codes. Usually looks
Yeah.
like something like an at and a square brace.
Yeah, or what I see a lot also is a square with a question mark in it. It's like
Yeah,
a funky question mark. I see that one too. So cool. So now look what's happening. We see a destroy, right?
yeah. So it's going through, and like you commented a minute ago, that the Azure RM provider is intelligent, right? It executes the command, and then it's smart enough to wait, and it has this concept of dependencies, so it knows that it shouldn't be recreating the new one until the old one goes down. So by default, that's how the resources will work. You can invert that default if you want to do like a create first before the destruction.
Yeah.
But it'll intelligently bring things up and down, and it knows relationships between resources. Now, in our case, the resource group, we don't have multiple resources to show that dependency tree yet, but it is intelligent enough to follow that dependency tree and know, okay, I got to recreate this base thing, so I've got to work my way up to it and then back down.
Very nice. I can't remember which one it was. That's how fast my brain moves. I can't remember the name. Oh no, it was desk test. Okay.
Yeah.
So this time it should be in the right spot.
Yep. So if you go out and look at that resource group, I expect to see East US to bounce. Hey, look, the 2 showed up.
It did.
Woot, woot.
Right? Yeah. So that's some pretty cool concepts, right, to kind of get us going. Just to close out what we did with the other two. So here we basically introduced the idea of locals and variables, right?
And
And
also
having
outputs too.
oh yeah, I forgot about the outputs. So there
Yeah.
is an output here
And
also.
this output here, you just like you saw it on your last terminal run where it showed
Yep.
the output RGID there at the end.
Yep.
Ultimately, like showing it on the terminal is nice, but again, that's a little bit of foreshadowing for what's to come.
Yeah. Well, and what's great is like, yeah, I mean, the point of this output is not just show up on that terminal,
Yeah.
although it does, right? The point of it is we can then inject this ID other places, right? So when we move on to other resources, obviously everything has to be in a resource group, right?
Yep.
The only thing in Azure that's not in a resource group is a resource group, right? When it comes to resources. And there's a couple weird things about resource groups. So resource groups are considered true global resources, right?
Okay. Yeah.
There's not many in Azure that are considered global. They all have a location. Even though you do pin a resource group to a location, it is considered a global resource.
Oh, okay.
Which you might remember some policy stuff we did. There's weirdness with policies with that, right?
Oh yeah.
On specific resource providers. So this is a weird resource provider. And then the other thing is, you can have resources from any region that are in a resource group in a different region, right? So the idea being that I could have a resource group, let's say like this one was East US 2, but I could have like um, virtual machines all over the world, right? Maybe I have an application deployed in that resource group, right?
Yep.
Let's call it Web App One. Web App One is on a bunch of different VMs with load balancers and all sorts of things all over the world. Maybe we um, have a traffic manager or something that's directing that around um, that traffic to those. But if I were to say go to version 2 of my app and I built all new VMs, let's say that VM1, I could just delete that resource group and it will whack that stuff all over the world, right? I don't have to like go to each region and say, okay, now I want to delete these VMs and now I want to delete those VMs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, once again, the best thing about you is the worst thing about you. That's also scary, right? That's also scary. You could go and delete an entire universe of stuff, right?
Yeah.
So buyer beware. But yeah, so this output's really cool because we'll use that later. So let's move on really quick over to 202. So one thing that's different here with the 202 is I think we went multi-region now, right? Like
Yeah. We
we
had
were
a
gonna
we introduced the concept of a count, that line
ah
20 there, because we
yes.
went from I want to stand up one of these things to I want to stand up a bunch of these things. So in this case, the idea that rather than rather than taking that B59's folder and just referencing it multiple times to effectively multiply our resource groups across all of the Azure locations, we changed our location variable from being a single value to being an array of values. So now we can say I want to deploy this same thing in Central US, East US, East US 2, etc., and it'll intelligently go through and build out all of those for us. So that also changed our locals from just being a resource group name to
Yep.
being a resource group prefix, that we're then going to just tack onto the front of the name, and then slap the we're putting the location as part of the name because I don't know, it made sense to me yesterday.
Yeah.
And
No, that's
then
okay.
tacking on the RG suffix on the end of it, so that now we're building out a bunch of these things. And I'm trying to remember. I think we set a default on that locations variable, just so
Yeah, I
that
think
it had
so.
multiple values. But that's all
Well,
this is effectively showing. Here's how you would, um, or I should say, here's one way you can start to scale out.
yeah, I think that there's a couple important concepts to capture here, right? Like the first thing that's important to capture is rather than like maybe like in the past, like full disclosure, like being a bad dev, right? Being more of an infrastructure person, my instinct would be I have something that works, right? Like a script, like an Azure, like an AZ CLI, I would do something like AZ group create, pass it the name and the location, right? Like the equivalent of what we've been doing in the Azure CLI would be like AZ group create, right?
Yep.
And I would pass it a name, right? Like name, and I would say foo bar, and I would say location, probably dash dash location, right?
Yep.
And I would put in like East US 2, and I would have that code, and you could put that in um, in a script, right? Call it from the command line. But if I wanted to create two groups, I would have two lines of code, copy paste, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we could take what we did, even all the way back up at 101, and we could do this, right? Like I could do this, could I not? Just have to change the name, so I have two names, right? And have a different name. I could do something like that, but that's bad, right?
Yep.
in here, what we've done is we have the command, if you will, of we're going to create a resource, but we're going to create multiple of them and use the language to actually do something interesting for us, right? So we've got this count where we're saying, I want you to count the length of whatever's in vars. So let's go look at the vars, right? Before it said location, now it says locations, right? And we put in, it looks like we've got three now, right?
Oh, well, that was smart of us.
I
I guess
must
we
have
really
added.
wanted to scale a lot.
Woohoo! So like going multi-region, right?
Hmm.
And actually using the concept of region pairs, um, we would be like this. So Central US and East US 2 are region pairs. They're kind of sister regions in Azure. So things like storage and other things like that, Azure Site Recovery, you can use those regions together to do replication.
Okay.
Same thing for West US and East US 2, right? So if I say I wanted to have 4 regions, both of them are pairs, then I would do something like that here. So what's different now is tell us about list string instead of list.
Yeah. So in this case, I guess in Terraform there's kind of three fundamental types. You've got individual scalar values, which is usually denoted as string.
Mm-hmm.
You've got arrays or lists, right, which is a
Yep.
collection of things. And then finally, there's full-on object types. So in our
Yep.
case here, what we've done is change out locations to be a list of strings. So rather than just the straight, single quotes, standard string syntax, we wrap it in the square braces, which
Yep.
I need to stop using the word array because I believe list is the technical Terraform reference for the type. But it really just denotes down to collection rather than individual value. And it's no more complicated than wrapping it in square braces and then comma separating each individual value as you go across. It's that
Yeah.
it's that simple. Again, it's the difference between an individual scalar and a collection.
Well, and I think that one thing that for me, when I start to think about this and learn and think ahead, right, is for something like this, when I potentially will have more than one, right? Sort of writing this as a list string and only having one value, right?
Hmm.
Kind of starts to make sense, doesn't it? Like it's pretty likely that you're going to have more than one resource group, right? That's what this is,
Yeah.
or sorry, more than one location, right? For any kind of big company or any kind of decent sized company, you're probably going to at least have two. So, like writing your code from the beginning, kind of taking that into account and thinking ahead makes sense, doesn't it? I mean,
It
because if it
does.
doesn't, I have to go back and refactor. So as soon as my boss or somebody says, "Shouldn't we have 2 regions?" I'm gonna have to go refactor my code, right?
Yeah. Well, and so the other thing that I would say is this is one way of scaling out. It is not the only way, which is where we get into our 301 with using the
Sure.
modules. So
Yep.
we put this one in here to show the concept of being able to use a count to
Yep.
effectively multiply out um, the
Yep.
resources. But effectively reusing modules is the other way that you can get similar results. So in Terraform, just
Got it.
because you say, hey, I want to deploy my infrastructure to multiple regions, it doesn't necessarily mean that you then just automatically make locations a list and then multiply out. Maybe you do,
Yeah.
maybe you don't. Structure
Sure.
matters, but you're absolutely right. Planning for where the likely expansion points are
Yeah.
is that
Yep.
comes to the art of the science rather than the science itself.
Sure. Well, and then here we have a local again, right? And this
Yeah.
idea of prefix is also interesting, right? In the sense that, we had this prefix where we said, maybe you always have something that's a part of a name or something like that. So we use something called an interpolation, right? Like that's what we're seeing in that name.
Yeah.
Because the name is ultimately a string. I mean, you see the quotes around it, and in my IDE, you can see the parts of the string are in kind of this orangey amber color, right?
Yep.
And then, so we've got this local prefix, but then, so how does this count index work? Because that's where these two things tie together, the count with the length, where we reference out of that list, right? And then here, I'm basically saying what with this var locations count index?
Yeah, so count is a what's called a meta property. So it's not necessarily tied to the Azure RM resource group type. It's something that exists on all Terraform resources regardless of provider. It's effectively built into your language or framework. And
Hmm.
it basically says I want this many of this resource. So if I say count of one, which is your default, it goes through and gives you one.
Yep.
But you can then, 2, 3, etc. So in our case, we've set count to be the length of our list, which I think we just said was 4.
Yep.
And then more importantly, once you do that count, anyone who's familiar with like Java or C Sharp type programming languages, you can imagine that what Terraform does is effectively a for loop where, I
Hmm.
equals 0, I less than count type deal. And it walks its way up. And so what you end up having then is as you're going through that for loop, you're going to want to access your current index to say, hey, where am I in my list of locations that I'm walking through? So whenever you set the count attribute on your resource, you then have access to count.index to then go and effectively index back into your source list to say,
Hmm.
hey, I want to pull out locations at index, you'll get 0, 1, 2, 3 in this case, right?
Hmm.
To pull out that appropriate location as I'm iterating over all of these resource groups. The other really awesome thing that happens is Terraform realizes that these resource groups have no dependencies on each other. So the provider is ultimately going to say, yeah, let's do them all in parallel, right? So sometimes people are like, wow, Terraform deploys things so fast. It's like, well,
Hmm.
all it's doing is figuring out what the dependencies are between your resources and saying, well, if this thing has no dependencies, or I've already created all the dependencies, let's deploy it. Like, let's go as fast as we possibly can and just parallel everything out. Occasionally, you have to tell Terraform to slow down because it goes too fast, but I mean,
Yeah.
better to
Well,
have
but
one than the other.
that's an important distinction, right? Because it's a difference between a procedural script, if you will. I mean, a
Mhm.
script is going to read each line, right? And
Yep.
it does what you say it to do. Whereas Terraform is going to figure out what it wants to do, and then what it's actually doing is it's making API calls, right? Like it's talking to the management API at Azure and saying, give me one of these, 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 right?
Yep.
It would be the same as standing I don't know, at like Subway or something, and say, I want a BMT, I want a sub club, I want this, I want that. And each person right behind the counter would go and make that individual thing. They can make those 3 sandwiches at once as long as there's multiple people there, right? But like in the case of
Right.
Azure, so like each worker, right, is and behind the counter at Subway is kind of like an API. It accepts your request and it goes and does what you asked it to do, right?
Right. Yeah.
Um, so the beautiful thing is with the Azure API is that it probably won't forget to put mayo or whatever it is you want on your sandwich, right? But if we like broke this down, right, and I know that this is probably really simplistic to a lot of people, but to me, this sort of thing is helpful to think about this. So the count there we know is going to come from var.location. So if I go and look at var.locations, we've got these 4 things here,
Mm-hmm.
right? And what's going to happen is it is actually doing 0, 1, 2, 3, right? That's what
Yep.
it's going to call them. So it will have each one of those. So like if we snag these here, and I'm just doing this to kind of get it in my mind, right? It would be like, it would sort of be like this. It's like, 3 equals this, 2 equals that, 1 equals this, right? And 0 equals that, right?
Yep.
Meaning the count. So like that's how it's counting. That's sort of what it's doing. And that prefix was coming from our local. We know that we always put locals in main and we always put variables in vars, right? So our local here. So this is going to be the same for everything, right?
Yeah.
Because it's just that one value. Okay. So we know that that's going to be B59s. And then the locations is actually here, right? It's these again,
Yep. Because
right?
it's looking those up.
Because here it's actually doing a lookup. Remember, here it's counting them, right? Here it's storing them, right? Meaning it's going to use those, right? So it's actually using the values. Up here it was counting the values to figure out how many it's going to create. Here it's storing the values. And so what's going to end up happening is it is um, it's going to actually call something 0, right? So item 0 will end up as B59s. And then we had like
Yeah,
I
they
think we have
needed a hyphen between them.
we did like a hyphen in between. Like you can see there's a little amber hyphen.
Yep.
So it's prefix hyphen the count. So the value of whichever one it is, and then hyphen RG, right? Um, where did
Yeah.
my code disappeared on me? Okay, there we go. So here, So then we have like on the first one, because we're on 0, it would be here, right? And then it would be RG,
Yep.
right? And we would get the same thing over and over again, right? So the next one would be like, 1. It's going to have most of this, but this time we're going to have the injected value of what equals 1. So in this case, it's East US 2, right? So that's how this list is going to get constructed, right? I'm not going to do them all, but you get the point. And what's interesting about it is when we actually run this code, we'll see the individual resources show up in the output, right? But also what's in the state file will be those, right?
Correct.
So it's kind of fascinating when you actually run this and you think through what's happening here. And I don't know, maybe this is simplistic to some people, but to me, it's not, right? Like, and we're talking about learning something from scratch. So I did it in init. So let's do a plan.
Yep.
Actually, let's do a format to make them look pretty. Oh, only the output. Okay. So let's do a plan and let's see what this comes up with, right?
Yeah. The other thing that's important to note, so I like to use the word index, right, where I think you use the word store, where it's doing count
good call.
sub item, because that order matters, right? If you went through and reordered this, because Terraform has to act in a deterministic manner.
Yeah.
If you were to say invert the order of, say, Central US and East US 2, right?
Mhm.
Terraform would see that as a change to each of those resources, because even though you've just effectively changed an order, from Terraform's perspective, the 0th element and the first element are both now modified, even though we know, hey, we just swapped those things. From its perspective, it's okay. I now have a change to both of those elements.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought about that. You're definitely right, because what's fascinating about that is that it would cause a destroy, would it not? I think it would.
It would, because what we saw earlier is whenever you
Yeah.
change the location, certain attributes on resources, when you modify them, and the Terraform docs are really good at calling this out, but there's certain attributes that, in order to modify them, require, like, there's not an in-place edit on the Azure resource for whatever reason, right? In this case, I'm guessing location, because it is switching data centers.
Yep.
That it actually has to delete and recreate. There's not a, hey, I'm just going to pick this thing up and relocate it across the country type maneuver.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fascinating. So like if we do this and we go ahead and create these really quick, right? So let's say beginner Terraform programmer goes back and looks at these vars and says, "Oh, I really want this to be in alphabetical order." Have we ever heard that before, Kevin? I want this to be in alphabetical order.
I've never heard that before in my life.
Yeah, then East US probably goes before East US 2, and then West US. Okay, so I want to do this. So let's let this create. Uh-oh, didn't like something.
It looks like
Oh, I already had one. Okay.
Yeah. This is the problem with us copying and pasting our samples.
Yeah, exactly. Let's get rid of this really quick.
You're gonna have to undo your ordering change if you want to reapply.
Oh boy, yeah, I will. See, it gets so persnickety, doesn't it? Okay.
Yeah. We may consider going through and changing up these samples so that they don't conflict with each other.
Yeah, that might be a good idea, right?
Just that way, if somebody goes through each of these, kind of like we're doing, one by one, that there's, maybe we should tack 101, 201, 202 into the name or something.
That'd be a good idea. Yeah. You'd put it part of the prefix, right?
Yeah. It makes the sample slightly more complicated on the 101, where we just literally hard coded the value, but yeah, we can just change the hard coded value to contain 101 or something on it.
Yep. So let's see what this apply does. But that's interesting, right? So like, even though you're not changing the name of it or even the location of it, when you change it in the code, the way it's referenced in the code, it might burp at you and say, "Hey, I want to destroy something," right? Like that's.
Yep. So real quick, just to point out, you'll note 3 of those things that refresh state on. So it knew that index 0, 2, and 3, that it had already created those.
Yeah.
So it was perfectly happy. And so because it fired all 4 of those in parallel before, one of the 4 failed, so your command failed. But 3 of them stayed up, and it was intelligent enough to not die until it finished creating those and report the error back. So
Yeah.
it's fairly good about running things in parallel and being intelligent about handling that dependency tree, which is like, that is, in my mind, one of the best things about using Terraform, is having that nice relationship between all of your resources.
Yeah, the other nice thing that's interesting as well is if you look at this name here where it says Azure RM underscore resource underscore group dot B59s underscore RG, that's the same name, even though there's now going to be 4 resources created, but that's the same Terraform name. There's just an index value with it, right?
Correct.
So there's not a one-to-one relationship between that code, right? There's a 1-to-n relationship based on the fact that we're doing a count and using an index for these, right? So that's also kind of cool.
Sorry, I derailed you there.
No, I think
now
that was
you can
great.
create your last one.
Yeah, so now I can go back to well, that's what I get for doing a demo on the fly. But hey, we're streaming, so it's all good, right? So let's go to the alphabetical obsessed people and make their OCD better, right? And do something like this, right? See, to me, this doesn't make sense because Central US is not a region pair with ECS2. I know Azure, right? So my brain goes, this is gross. That doesn't make sense. But to a person that's just being, alpha.
You see the difference between the programmer mindset and the IT mindset.
Yeah, exactly, right? Exactly. So if I do a plan again, we should see this really barf, right? Because I think I moved 3 of them. I moved 3.
Let's
3
see.
of
You
the
took
4.
one from the end and moved it up. So yeah, I think that should show a change on the everything but Sub-Zero.
Yeah, exactly. So fascinating, right? So let's see what the plan for this looks like. We spent the entire time talking about resource groups, but I think that that's okay because I know I learned a few things, and it also cemented what we did on this first block of code. So
Yeah.
I guess we'll have to come back to VNets, but that's okay. Wow, look at this! Holy smokes! Okay, so
the big red scary force replacement. Anybody reviewing the plan, that should immediately raise the, hey, I should look closer at this moment.
yeah, scary, right?
Yeah.
I love the VT100 here. It's awesome, right? But yeah, so let me go see if we can find. Well, I guess you can even see them right there in the refreshing of state, right? So the first change that we see is index 1.
Yep.
Right. So currently in state, you see this says refreshing state. So East US 2 was index 1 before, right? And now it's going to be changed
to East US.
To East US, right? So the quote unquote change, you can't, as you mentioned, you can't move a resource group, right?
Yeah, not across location.
Not across locations.
But
So
you could change its name. So
yeah. But fascinating, right? So in the sense that
not.
I don't think you can change its name.
I was gonna say, I'm just noticing the name change also shows force replacement. So okay.
Yeah, no, I don't. You can't rename resource groups. You really can't rename anything in Azure. I don't think. I'm not aware of anything without some kind of a replacement. So anyway, so as you see here, yeah, this is gonna
it's gonna be a highly destructive plan.
Very destructive, right? So what's just to take note there and understanding when you're using these indexes is if you try to go back and refactor your code for something silly like I want it to be alphabetized, if there was a bunch of resources in these groups, yeah, they would all die because you were like, oh yeah, I just want to replace this with that name, or I want that in order. That's scary. And this is one of those places where you are the safety valve, right?
Yeah. You have to be reviewing those plans.
You are the safety valve. I see a lot of, because I've done some research about trying to look for articles and stuff lately about people, using GitHub Actions or Azure DevOps to do Terraform. And there's a lot of, especially with Azure DevOps, I've seen a lot of build pipelines that do plans and applies, right? Yikes, right? Like, whoa. I mean, you are a international man of mystery if you're doing that, right? Um, the one thing some people do is they'll do them with stages, like with, you can do stages where it stops and you have to start the next stage by invoking it or something, but still scary, right?
Yeah. You want to make sure before you hit your prod environment that you have reviewed the plan of what Terraform is going to do, and
Yeah,
and especially like right at that right, I guess down near the end where it says kind of the summary where it says plan 3 to add, 0 to change, 3 to destroy. Like at a bare minimum, when you're checking your plan, you should be looking at that, and if the count for destroy is higher than 0, you should
yeah,
pay very like that's the point where you are potentially about to lose information. If it's just stuff to add, how bad could it be?
yeah,
Um, but like that destroy count is always the immediate red flag. Red flag. Go look close at what's getting destroyed and why. And some things are okay to be destroyed, right? Like
sure.
there are certain things. Maybe it's a management lock or something simple, right? Where
Yeah.
you need to take it off so that you can tweak something. Okay, you expect the destruction there. You know it's not going to cost you data. That's
Yeah.
fine.
No, I think that you're right. I would say that one of the things that I've tried to do, um, with this push for me personally with learning Terraform, one of the things I've been doing is just writing code, don't care what it is, every single day, right?
Hmm.
And one of the reasons why I'm doing that, and doing a lot of plans and not necessarily a lot of applies, but a lot of plans, right? Like every time I write something, doing a plan, but doing some applies also, right? Because you'll learn stuff like this. I think that the skill of learning to read a plan, right, is there's a skill to it, especially when they get big, right?
Yeah.
Like you and I work on a project where our plans are huge, right? And
Yeah, we've got a few
trying to,
resources.
yeah, right, and trying to decipher what's going on. I mean, I don't know about you, but to me, the first thing I always do is I immediately scroll to the bottom, right? I look for this line, the three, how many add, how many change, how many destroy, just so I have some context in my brain of what I'm looking at, right?
Yeah.
Um, and that's very helpful. And also doing a plans and doing applies like in a, we use like a sandbox subscription. I think that's really helpful too. Right? Being able to set that context to some kind of place that's not prod, right? Um,
Test your
you know,
script before you pull request it, you mean?
yeah, exactly. And especially places where it's loose. I mean, because the thing is like you and I, especially on that one project that we work on, we've got some pretty good controls actually, right? Like
Oh
we
yeah.
can't merge the master without PRs. We have to approve each other, but we built all that, right?
Hmm.
If you're just by yourself or it's like you and one other person and you're a lean shop or a startup or something like that, like, yeah, you can whack stuff pretty easily, right? Like,
Oh yeah.
oops, and you could destroy things that people have done. Now, I guess it's kind of on other people to manage their own source so they can recreate whatever it is that they were trying to create. But that still, that's not really fair when they're like in the middle of a workday or something, and they've got a Databricks cluster or something like that, and they're hacking away trying to write a new notebook, and then you whack their cluster right out from under them by accident or something.
I have
Not
never
cool.
done that.
Ah, okay. Exactly. Well, our biggest thing is we're always putting NSG rules on things that break people, right? Like that's, they seem innocuous, but and they are even in the plans, but then we turn them on and then people can't get to things, right? And
Yeah.
that always causes churn because one of the big things to think about with these kind of big dev environments is that dev to developers is production, right?
Yeah.
you know, a dev subscription, a dev whatever. So well, cool. So this is kind of interesting. So yeah, if I like actually ran this, obviously it would
Yeah.
go
Bring
through.
them down and stand them back up.
Yeah. Well, so we've got only about 20 minutes left in the time that we planned, right? So maybe what we'll do is just go through this
Yeah.
shared module and then call it a stream. I don't know how you feel. I'm getting a little tired.
That
Um,
sounds good. My coffee cup's empty.
is it? Yeah, exactly. I'm with you. I'm almost there. Well,
I
let's
got it.
take a quick.
I
What's
get up
that?
early. I was gonna say I get up early for these things, so
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that.
yeah. I mean, if people are interested in more of this, I think Dan and I are probably gonna plan on streaming more of this. Question.
Yeah.
Put them on the
Yeah.
spot. But
Yeah. Absolutely.
So yeah, so
Not
our 301 module, because in the 202 we looked at doing the count and adding out the list of values there.
yep.
In 301, because I hinted to it before that there was a little foreshadowing coming, that there's more than one way to scale out, and so like Dan said, making sure that you're planning for that. The other way that Terraform allows you to effectively reuse scripts and scale is with modules. So
Yep.
instead of just applying counts to a bunch of stuff and trying to tweak those things, you end up going through and effectively being able to reference a Terraform module. And a Terraform module is just a folder that contains Terraform files. It's no
Yep.
more complicated than that.
Yep.
It really is just that simple. But once you have effectively a folder with your Terraform scripts in it, you can now go through and reference it as many times as you want. So rather than scaling out, an individual resource, you might scale out a module instead.
Hmm.
And with latest version of Terraform, that count property that we saw in the resource now gets applied to modules as well. So
Hmm.
TF13 if you haven't updated to it. But then you can apply the count to the module, and automatically then everything inside of that folder you'll get X number of instead. So it's another option for figuring out how to scale things out. And I think the first question comes, okay, well, when do I use count and when do I use modules, right?
Hmm. Yep.
I think that's the key question to ask. And I think the guidance I would say is a module should be a self-contained thing that you can reasonably deploy. So at the end of all of this, I think our VM one that we're talking about doing will probably be a module.
Yeah.
And inside of that module, it would contain everything needed for the VM, right? So the VM resource, the NIC, the pip, the NSG, all that stuff that we had kind of outlined of what you need,
Hmm.
but built out so that you could scale it. You could imagine building a VM module that that maybe you pass a VM count to, where you may increment the count of the VM resources, but maybe still only create a single VNet resource to have all of those things on the same VNet or similar, right?
Yeah.
So something to that effect. So this 301 example now shows switching over from just using straight count to, okay, let's do a module reference instead.
Hmm.
So that was a
Yeah.
lot
So
of words.
no, but that's okay. So like inside the folder where the module is, like we created a modules folder, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what we did. With the foreshadowing probably of, if you have a project, you're most likely, and you're doing modules, you're probably gonna have multiple of them, right?
Yep.
Like you probably have modules, like here we have RG, like you were just talking about, maybe we'd have VNet and we would have VM, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we would call those modules. So our folder out, what here is like at the level of quote unquote 301 there, right? We would be calling out those modules to create something using the module. So in this case here, we've got the RG. So, but these look really similar though, right? Like we have the same local, right?
Yep.
In main, nothing else in there. We've got the RG where, same thing.
Yep.
I mean,
We're
there's
still
no,
we're still passing in the locations here too, right? Like we didn't
yep.
we didn't really
Hmm.
change the structure of this. Now, we may want to change this up and switch this back to the same scalar value. That way,
Yep.
if somebody wants to do multiple locations, it's
Yeah,
not necessarily
sure.
driven here. But again, that's, I think, like I said, coming back to a little bit more of the art than the science here of
Yep.
what are you building and what makes sense for what's going to end up in the module.
Yeah. Well, and the one thing that's really important here is this ID, right? Like
Yes.
this ID becomes even more important, right? Because now that we're running out of this folder, remember we were talking about all the folders before, right? When you're using the modules, it's different in terms of like how you're referencing this. Which next stream or something we'll get into this a little bit more when we do the VNets or whatever, where we have to create an RG and create a VNet. When we create that VNet, we're going to have to reference the IDs that are here, right, and get those values out, right?
Right. Yeah,
Um,
and one thing real quick that I don't
yep.
think we hit on, just on that outputs, the
Yep.
splat operator, because
Oh
we have
yeah.
a
Hmm.
because
Yep.
we have a count on that resource group resource. You
Yep.
you don't want your output to just be, say, sub 0.8. Maybe you do,
Yep.
but in our case, we want to output all of the IDs. So that little dot star there says, go through all of the items that we create. So if we can
Yep.
create 3 or whatever, it'll
Yep.
include all of those. And so that RG's ID, you don't explicitly specify a type, but you can think of it as being another, say, list of strings where it's got that list of IDs
Yep.
propagating back out.
Exactly. Cool. And then there's a difference now. I already opened up the provider block. That's the same because we're using Azure Provider. But there's a difference here. And wow, this is really simple,
Yep.
right? Because all the code is somewhere else.
Yep.
So what we're saying here now is basically, I just want you to run the module, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we have to point to where the module is. Now, what's interesting about the source here, obviously we're in a folder structure, we're running this here, but this source could also be other things, right? Like it could be a Git repo.
Yeah,
Correct?
you can go through and pull that in from various ways, and maybe we'll get all the way to a sample of doing that.
Yeah.
But there are blog posts written out there about effectively maybe you want to take these modules and have it as something that gets referenced. So, I mean, some people go the Git approach and do like Git submodules to bring in some shared set of code, but you can actually reference straight into a Git repo. The only fun bit there is figuring out the auth and how to pull it in. But as long as that source can effectively bring that in, because the Terraform init, what's going to end up happening is it'll download the code for all of your providers, but then it'll also make sure that it can hit all of the code for each of the referenced modules, because sometimes those modules, again, may not necessarily be local. So your Terraform init is actually responsible for making sure that it can bring that down and get access to it.
That's interesting. Now I'm updating South Central and North Central because we haven't used those, right? in the names here.
Yep.
Is this the right way to do this though? I mean, or would it make more sense to like pass it from the command line, or like what's the best? What's your thoughts here?
So in this case, I would almost say that what might be better is rather than just changing your default, we can just pass that in at the module reference. So back all the way up at the top in your RGTF.
Yep.
What you can do here is after source, you now have access to locations, right?
Yep.
So you can just say locations equals. You don't even need the var.
Sorry.
Yeah. Yep. So it references it there, and then you can just specify the ones that you want here. So this is the similar to passing things on the command line. This will ultimately let you override those values. So the scoping for Terraform is all directory based. So when you're doing things on the command line, you're basically acting on the outermost directory or your current directory that you're working in. And so you won't necessarily see outputs from your modules. You'll only see outputs from the directory that you're acting on. And so effectively at each either module reference or directory structure, whichever way you want to look at it, you're responsible for either forwarding inputs in or forwarding outputs back out, depending on what makes sense for what you're doing.
Yeah. So, I kind of led you into that, right? Because remember here, folks, this default is just a default. All it does is that by having the default is it keeps me from having to pass a variable, because it's a variable. I have to pass a value. Remember earlier when we did the I think it was dash var, and then in the single ticks, I would have to say locations, because this one has an S on it, and then equals, and I would have to pass an array like this, right? Or sorry, an index. I'm doing it too. But that's the thing, and I could do also the same thing with the name, right? Like I could, I could change this up too. But obviously we built this; it works. So in this case, so this is actually a kind of a nice use case. I guess probably what I should do is change.
Yeah, you can undo your change here and.
Yeah, because I actually would like the sample to show you a default, right? Like that would be the default, but here I'm actually changing that with this, right?
Yeah. So now if you run the plan on that guy, I would totally expect to see both of those show up with your overridden values.
Exactly. So that's really nice. So the idea is that in the module you might have a default.
It worked.
Yeah, look at that. Yeah. but you can at the command line or pass it, right? Or here we can do it in where we're actually invoking the module, right? Was I right to put this white space in between those two things? Was that a good idea?
Yeah, so just sort of the convention I like is the sort of the meta E level um, things get
Hmm.
separated with a white space between them and everything else, and then usually I separate out the difference between required and optional.
Yeah,
Just when I'm writing it. So in this case, source is a required thing for a module reference. You
got
are
it.
if you have a module reference, you have to tell it where the module code lives.
Got it.
So you have to give a source. So just that separation there between required and optional. Again,
That
convention
makes
based,
sense.
but that's usually the rationale that I end up using.
Yeah, that makes sense. That, I mean, to me, that makes a lot of sense. I like that, and I like also the idea of really like required things almost putting defaults. I mean, I personally like that because, especially in samples like this, because it'll keep people from getting confused. Like, why won't this run? I need something, or why is it asking me for a variable or something um, at the command line?
Yeah.
But it also helps you to sort of get your head around, okay, well, I could change this. And if you kind of think ahead to yourself, um, other examples of this, like on a VM, you might have a default size,
Hmm.
right? Like a V1 or something small, but which is a part of the module. So if I just invoke the module as it is, I'm passing that because that's obviously a required thing. What size the
Right.
VM is. We probably wouldn't want to make it like an M128, that costs like $65,000 a month or something, right? Like we probably want the default to be something small, but to override that, I think of this, the way I think of this is, this to me is like runtime. That's like the word I use in my mind. Like, I'm, like at runtime, I'm passing something the same way, at runtime, meaning I'm typing terraform apply dash var and then, putting it there. So providing that value when it actually runs, what I want it to say. Um, so cool.
Yeah.
Well, hey,
So
well,
one
that
other
was
thing I'll show you
fun.
real quick, just
Yeah,
for
sure.
fun. So right
Hmm.
where you're specifying locations there,
Yep.
um, just uh, get rid of the values inside and set it to an empty list,
Okay.
just for fun.
So just like this.
Yeah. So in this case, you've now taken the defaults and you've just said, yeah, no.
Yeah, I got you.
And
Okay.
so in this case, you can a fun trick that you can play on Terraform with that count property is you can go through, and 0 is a valid value for count. So in this case, it now knows, hey, there's nothing to change.
Mm.
So anytime you want to do some sort of like conditional logic for, do I create this thing or not? Like I know we've done a lot of logic around, maybe
Yeah.
you've got some Boolean condition and you've got some flag that you say on or off, right?
Yeah.
And all it does is change the count from 0 or 1, right? So
Yeah.
that you have a way effectively of turning this thing on and off.
Yeah.
It does mean that once you specify that count property, you now have to play by the rules of count with like splat operators or indexers and that kind of thing.
Mm. Yeah.
Um, but it does give you that option of saying turn it off, right?
Well,
Given this
yeah. What?
condition, I don't want it on.
Yeah, that's interesting because once again, that's kind of the thinking ahead, so I don't have to refactor later, right?
Yes.
Because if you have 5 or 6 environments with multiple regions, like imagine you have 4 subscriptions: dev, test, stage, and prod, and you've got multiple regions too, right?
Hmm.
So you're at 8. And if those types of things are like hard coded all over the place, right?
Yeah.
You would have to go refactor all of that code so that it worked the same way. And I guarantee you what will happen is people get lazy and you would not do that. What would happen is you would change it in the one place where you need it, and then everything is different, right?
Yep.
Because of the fact that you had all this tech debt of refactoring. You would refactor one, then you have tech debt for something else. And of course, we all know what happens with tech debt, right? So,
Back burner all the way.
yeah. If tech debt was savings, we'd all be billionaires, right? But we'd only have to pay $750 in taxes, so it'd be sweet, right? So there you go. Well, cool. Well, we talked a lot about the code we wrote before, and we wrote like no lines of code, but I think it was useful. What do you think?
I think it was useful. I think at the end of our last one, we were like, man, we should have recorded this, and now it feels like we have.
But yeah, we just didn't code it. So next time we'll actually start writing code because I do have to finish the sprint with the with the code in it. So.
That is very true.
But I will hold off and we will write the code together because that will be helpful, not only to me, but to all of our friendly people on the stream. So,
Yeah.
well, this was pretty awesome. Thanks, Kevin.
Cool.
I love it.
Well, thank you, Dan.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. This was fun.
Yeah.
And I think for people who are wanting to see more of this, I believe Tuesday morning, I think 6 a.m. Pacific Standard, watch Dan or my's Twitter, and you'll definitely see notifications coming out for it. But I believe that's when the next one will be. So
Yeah, for sure. And check out our blog, Build 59s. Hopefully, we can co-opt Kevin into writing some blogs there at some point, maybe, or helping me when we get more of this code out there. We'll definitely be writing some blogs. Chris Peachman, the founder of Build 59s, was already begging me when I showed him this 301 code, and now we have this stream, right? To write a blog just on that. So maybe we'll do this because I think it's useful. That simple, just the resource group helps to explain a lot of things, you know?
yeah, yeah, and it's sort of that foundational building block that we're gonna plug in for everything else. So hopefully by
Yep.
the end of this, people have a really strong idea of how to set up a good enterprise grade Terraform system.
Right. I mean, that's the idea. And we do have these, getting started articles. Chris wrote
Yeah.
a great article here, just that really kind of helps you to get going with, some of the terms. Like, we haven't really talked about kind of projects, but we were talking about directories today,
Hmm.
the input variables, modules, that sort of thing. So just to help you to get going. And I just want to say, if I can, those of you out there that are not developers, that are IT, and these words like DevOps and code and pipelines and all this stuff scares you, it is possible to convert yourself. I've been saying for a while that I'm recovering IT guy, Kevin. That's what I say, recovering, right? Um, and it is possible. Now you do need help, right? You need people like Kevin to bring you along. I appreciate him being patient with my conversion from being a muggle to being something of a bad developer. Um, but it's so cool how you can create all this infrastructure with this code. I love it. I really do. So, well, awesome. Well, thanks, man.
Well, thank
This
you,
was
Dan.
fun. Cool.
Sounds good. I will tell everyone happy coding, and I will see you all next time.
Later.